Hi, good afternoon. On behalf of the Producers Guild and the Sustainable Production Alliance, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, California Compost Compliance, Understanding SB 1383. My name is Arlen Valdivia, and I'm a Senior Director for State and Local Government Affairs for the Motion Picture Association, and I will serve as your moderator today. I'm joined by Jeff McDaniel, an environmental scientist with CalRecycle, the California Department of Resources, Recycling, and Recovery in the Local Assistance and Market Development Branch. Jeff is going to walk us through a presentation to give us a better understanding of Senate Bill 1383 and why it's important. Jeff, on to you.
Thank you very much, Arlen. It's a pleasure to be here. I will share my screen here. Can everyone see this okay and hear me okay? Okay, so hello, my name is Jeff McDaniel, and as mentioned, I am an environmental scientist with CalRecycle, the California Department of Resources, Recycling, and Recovery, which is a branch of the California Environmental Protection Agency. We oversee the state's waste management, recycling, and waste reduction programs. Today, I'm going to provide a brief overview of SB 1383, why it is important, and what it is, as well as what is being required of generators of organic waste. More specifically, how it applies to all of you in the film industry. The law, which is the biggest change to the recycling and waste industry since the 1980s, has many components. Among them includes the recycling of organic materials and/or edible food recovery. I hope today we can paint a clearer picture of how this law will impact your work, and I hope that this is the start of the conversation. It is also worthwhile to mention that this law impacts everyone from all levels of government, schools, colleges, universities, businesses, and residents. Essentially anyone who generates organic waste in California. But first, I want to provide some context as to why the law was enacted and why it is important. There we go. SB 1383 passed in 2016. It is an ambitious statewide target that requires California to reduce organic waste sent to landfill by 75% by the year 2025 and increase edible food recovery by 20% by 2025. Organic waste is defined broadly in the regulations and includes food waste, paper, cardboard, green waste, organic textiles and carpets, lumber, wood, biosolids, digestate, manure, and sledges. CalRecycle collaborated with cities, counties, and numerous other stakeholders for several years to complete the regulations that were final as of November 3rd, 2020. Cities and counties, also known as jurisdictions and generators, were required to be in compliance by January 1st, 2022. So why is it important? Well, SB 1383 is part of California's larger strategy to combat climate change. The law was designed to reduce global warming superpollutants like methane, which is up to 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Landfills are one of the biggest producers of methane in California. And because when organic material breaks down in the landfill, it generates methane. So we need to move away from landfilling organic waste like food, paper, and yard waste. Landfilling organic waste is also a significant source of air quality pollutants like nitrous oxides and particulate matter. These pollutants have an immediate negative impact on air quality, thus on our communities, and can cause respiratory issues and hospitalizations. Diverting organic waste to recycling can significantly reduce these local air quality emissions and the associated negative impacts. We are starting to see the effects of climate change in cities and counties throughout California. Longer droughts and warmer temperatures are drying our forests and contributing to the ever increasing number of wildfires in California, which impact air quality. Cyclical droughts, bigger storms, coastal erosion and saltwater intrusion, all due to rising sea levels. We should not underestimate the cost of these climate change impacts. The state and communities are spending billions fighting wildfires, removing debris, and rebuilding homes. That means we are paying for the effects of climate change today. The financial and public health impacts are already here, and we need to take action to mitigate climate change now. That is why the state enacted SB 1383, which is designed to reduce global warming gases like methane, which are the most pollutant and are considered short-lived. SB 1383 is a fast track to fighting climate change. Reducing this gas now through actions like organic waste recycling will significantly reduce emissions and will reduce the impacts of climate change in our lifetime. Organic waste comprises nearly 2/3 of California's waste stream. Food waste alone is the largest waste stream in California sent to landfill. At the same time, 1 in 5 Californians either go hungry or do not know where their next meal is coming from. This includes children. Redirecting perfectly edible food that is currently being disposed to feed those in need can help alleviate this. Frankly, we believe we can do better. We believe we have an obligation to do better. SB 1383 provides some pretty significant opportunities, like providing millions of meals to Californians without enough to eat. In fact, recovering 1 ton of edible food could provide more than 1,600 meals to hungry people. I've already mentioned environmental benefits such as fighting climate change and improved air quality, but also for every 2.5 tons of food rescued, that is the equivalent of taking 1 car off the road for a year. There is also a tremendous opportunity in creating thousands of new green jobs. Just to really drive home this point about edible food recovery, I want to point out that hunger in California has doubled during the pandemic, and it doesn't appear to be getting any easier. If you follow the red line in the photo to the right, you'll see a line of cars. It's people waiting for food at their local food bank. This image was taken from a video of the Los Angeles Regional Food Bank helping to feed communities in April of 2020. The video was taken at a time when the state was feeling the impacts of the shelter-in-place mandate immensely, and food insecurity skyrocketed due to the loss of income and other pandemic-related issues. So you can clearly see there is a need, and SB 1383 aims to provide support to recovery organizations and services across the state. Some ideas that may also be helpful to keep in mind as benefits to generators of potentially donatable food include tax benefits. Food donors are advised to consult with their tax advisor for information on tax deductions. And for information on tax credit in California, please see Chapter 503, Statutes 2011, regarding donations to food banks, voluntary contributions, and income tax credits. Also, there are potential to save some money. The more food donated means less food sent as organic waste and therefore lower waste management costs. You might also see this as a good PR moment to show that food generators are not only reducing the amount of food sent to landfill, but also helping to support local communities in need. So under the regulations, starting this year in 2022, jurisdictions, again, those are cities and counties, are required to provide mandatory organic waste collection services to all of their generators. Mandatory service is required to ensure that we achieve the organic waste reduction targets. This mandatory service is what we refer to as automatically providing service or universal service. Commercial organic waste generators, including the various productions of the film industry, must participate in the service unless they have been granted a waiver by the jurisdiction. Again, a jurisdiction means a city and county, or a special district that provides solid waste collection services. Some of you, particularly studio locations, may already be subscribing to recycling and organics recycling service. For any commercial organic waste generators that are not subscribed, starting in 2022, they will automatically receive service. This approach is similar to what happens when you move into a house. When you have a trash service, it starts right when you move in. The containers are provided automatically. If you don't have service yet, it will be important that you work with your hauler to right size your service. This means you may, for example, be able to reduce your trash service if you're using other containers for organic waste and other recyclables. For productions that change locations, it's important that you work with local haulers and/or jurisdictions to provide the correct service to each production. For organic waste generators, the jurisdictions will be providing the containers. The type and number of containers will depend on the type of collection service. The colors of the containers will be the same throughout the state by the end of 2036. This standardization of colors will help us all know what materials go in each container. Beginning at January 1st, 2022, jurisdictions will need to label all external containers that are provided to generators, such as dumpsters, carts, debris bins, roll-off bins. The label will specify which primary materials are allowed and not allowed to be placed in each container. Now we'll cover some of the main requirements for all of you related to collection. Any organic waste generator must either subscribe and comply with the requirements of the organic waste collection service provided by the city, or you can self-haul organic waste. And please note that jurisdictions will have specific requirements for self-hauling entities, including some record-keeping requirements. For instance, businesses must keep records of the amount delivered to each facility. Businesses must provide collection containers for organic waste and recyclables in all areas where disposal containers are provided but for customers, except in bathrooms. Internal containers must conform to the proper color requirements and labeling requirements. If a business chooses to use containers that are the correct color, internal containers do not need to be replaced until they are no longer functional or until January 1st, 2036, whichever comes first. To reduce contamination, businesses must provide education to employees. Employees, contractors, tenants, and customers. Again, that's education regarding how to properly sort organic material into the correct containers. Commercial generators must also periodically inspect the recycling and organic waste containers for contamination. They will inform employees if containers are contaminated and of the requirement to properly use the containers. These two requirements will reduce contamination of organic waste by the employee. When organic waste is mixed with non-organic waste, the recoverability of both materials is compromised. Recovery options become increasingly limited, and the value of at least one material can be lost. For example, broken glass mixed in with food waste can render each material exceedingly more expensive and technically challenging to recover. If a commercial generator does not generate any of the materials that would be collected in one type of container, then the generator does not have to have a container for employees or customers. For example, if your project does not generate any green or food waste, then you would not need to have collection service or the internal container for that material for your employees or customers. A commercial generator should coordinate with the city to determine if a waiver from the collection service can be provided. By 2022, Cities and counties will have a process for deciding if a commercial organic waste generator is eligible for a waiver. Generators can also manage organic waste on site or use community scale composting activities. Commercial generators must annually provide education to employees, contractors, tenants, and customers about organic waste recovery requirements and about proper sorting of organic waste. They must also provide information to new tenants within 14 days of occupation of a premises. If you need assistance with education, please contact your local recycling coordinator. Employees, contractors, tenants, and customers must properly sort organic materials into the correct containers at business establishments. If a city needs to conduct an inspection, then a commercial generator has to provide or arrange for access to the properties during all inspections. SB 1383 also requires certain commercial edible food generators to recover for human consumption the maximum amount of edible food that would otherwise be disposed. That's through a contract or a written agreement with food recovery organization or service. Not all production scenarios are likely to qualify for this requirement. In other words, edible food recovery may not pertain to some productions, but we wanted to prepare some scenarios where it might. So this slide shows how the regulations have been broken down commercial edible food generators into two tiers. Tier 1 commercial edible food generators that are required to comply this year in 2022 include food service providers. And this might include food concession contractors, and these are the caterers delivering food to productions. So they would qualify as a tier 1 edible food generator, but only from what we call the back of house operations. So everything that they do from their end. Once food is dropped off at a set location, if they're not providing an on-site staff, then it is not required for the production to then donate to an edible food recovery organization or service. On-site staff, if it is provided by the caterer, then the caterer would still be required to comply. Tier 2 commercial edible food generators are required to comply by 2024, and Tier 2 casts a wider net. Here we might be taking a closer look at the facilities at each studio and set location to determine if they meet the definitions. For instance, based on how cafeterias operate, they might be considered Tier 1 or Tier 2. Cafeterias may likely be considered a large venue, which are defined as a permanent venue facility that annually seats or serves an average of more than 2,000 individuals within the grounds of a facility per day of operation. Also, restaurants with facilities greater than 5,000 square feet or have 250 or more seats. We would encourage you to contact the city or county personnel to help make that determination. If those facilities or events do meet the criteria, then each commercial edible food generator must have a contract or written agreement with a food recovery organization or service that will collect the edible food for food recovery. Or again, you can self-haul edible food to a food recovery organization that will accept the food that is allowed. There are also, again, record-keeping requirements for commercial edible food generators. If you are interested in what those are, let me know and I can follow up with you afterwards. So by January 1st, 2022, jurisdictions are required to have an enforcement mechanism or an ordinance in place, and most of them do. Between January 2022 and December 2023, jurisdictions need to identify businesses that are in violation of the regulatory requirements and provide educational material to those generators. Beginning January 2024, jurisdictions must take progressive enforcement action against organic waste generators that are not in compliance. Every Californian plays an important role in addressing the climate crisis by not disposing organic waste. We cannot meet the state's climate change goals without separating organic waste from landfills. Food recovery is the highest and best use for food that would otherwise go to waste. Feeding hungry people through food recovery is the best use for surplus food and a vital way for California to conserve resources and reduce waste thrown in landfills. So on the screen, you'll see some important links that you can check out, for instance, to our website, as well. You can sign up for our listserv at the state and my contact information as well. So now I'd like to open up for questions. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff. That was very informative. As you mentioned, this law applies to everyone, whether you're a county, city, or a business. This means that we'll have impact for productions. So I wanted to ask you a few questions related to productions. What do individual productions need to do to comply with SB 1383?
Sure, it's a good question. It's important. Thank you. I would say that you can kind of break it up into 4 categories: collection, containers, inspection, and education. So to reiterate and dive deeper into each of those, businesses are required to either subscribe to and participate in a jurisdiction's organic curbside collection service, or self-haul organic waste to a specified facility. And again, that can be a composting facility, community composting program, or other activity. Businesses must provide collection containers for organic waste and recyclables in all areas where disposal containers are provided for customers, except in bathrooms. However, if a business does not generate any of the material that would be collected in a specific container, then it does not have to provide that particular container. Let's see, there's internal containers must conform to the proper color requirements and labeling requirements. And there's contamination. To reduce contamination, businesses must provide education to employees, contractors, tenants, and customers regarding how to properly sort organic material into the correct container. Businesses must periodically inspect organic waste containers for contamination. They must inform employees if containers are contaminated, instruct employees about how to properly sort materials into the correct containers. They must also annually educate employees, contractors, customers, and tenants on how to properly sort organic waste into the correct bin. And provide information to new tenants within 14 days. And then the employees themselves, the contractors, tenants, and customers must properly sort the materials into the correct containers.
And how big does a production have to be subject to this law?
So basically, all commercial generators are expected to separate organic material regardless of the amount of material that's generated. And however, like a physical space waiver that can be issued by a jurisdiction, there may be scenarios where a jurisdiction can be issued what's called a de minimis waiver. If a commercial generator provides documentation or a city or county has evidence demonstrating the generator meets specific criteria, and I can dive into what that criteria is if you like. Also, but again, the scenario with physical space waivers and with de minimis waivers is something that you're going to want to reach out and connect with your jurisdiction. Many jurisdictions have a process in place. They are required to have, they don't have to have a process in place, but basically, yeah, if you're going to get a waiver, it's going to be through them. But if they don't have a process in place, then there is no waiver.
Got it. And who's typically in charge of implementation?
So it is the jurisdictions that are required to implement and enforce the law. They are who you should be in contact with to right size your service. I'm not sure who in the production world would manage this. I believe that's, in previous conversations, we said that it might be like a location manager or production crew. That's
okay. And for indies and non-scripted that don't have a large studio support, how would this work for them?
Yeah, so that's something that like the studios would need to work out with their local jurisdictions and haulers and perhaps location managers and production crew. Again, the law applies to all generators.
And does the hauler change whether you're at a studio facility or on location?
A hauler could change from city to city or jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions may have multiple haulers, while others have just one exclusive hauler. The studio or production would need to reach out to the local jurisdiction to discuss local services. Depending on the location, you may not be subject to edible food recovery, but you may be subject to organic waste collection still. Regarding parks and public spaces, you want to work with your local jurisdiction to make that determination. And if you need a local contact, you can let me know, or you can look it up on our contacts database, and I'd be happy to share that link in the chat.
And speaking of studio lots, I'm sure there'll be an impact to facilities, and you touched a little bit on this already. What do studios facilities need to do to comply? And along those lines, what are the space constraints for composting on the lot?
Yeah, so it's the same requirements apply to the to all generators that I addressed in the other question about individual productions. So regardless of the amount of waste they generate, regardless of the number of people involved in a production, it applies to everyone. It would behoove that each studio either individually or collectively develop a plan for all productions to be in compliance with the law. Working with your local municipality to determine how to comply, subscribe to organics collection service, and or a contract with an edible food recovery organization, if that's applicable. Productions need appropriate bins and signage regardless of their location.
So let's talk a little bit about compliance and record keeping. What are the requirements, including record keeping for production and facilities?
So if a production or a facility self-hauls material through a recycling facility, then it must keep a record of the amount of, and not just the amount, but the facility location. And jurisdiction must have the ability to conduct inspections if they deem an inspection is necessary, and they would ask for that material then. If a production or facility meets the commercial edible food requirement, then record keeping is applicable, and generators must have a written agreement with a recovery organization to collect or self-haul material and maintain donation records.
And what are the repercussions if not in compliance?
Yeah, it's a really important question. So basically after January 2024, jurisdictions must take progressive enforcement against organic waste generators that are not in compliance. The progressive approach allows for notification to the generator and provides time for the generator to comply before penalties are required to be issued to by the jurisdiction. So CalRecycle sets a maximum time frame that a jurisdiction has to issue a notice of a violation and issue penalties to a generator in the regulations. The jurisdiction has the flexibility to develop its own enforcement process within these parameters. And so when a jurisdiction determines a violation occurred, the jurisdiction is required to, at a minimum, issue a notice of violation within 60 days of determining a violation. And if the generator still has not complied within 150 days from the issuance of the notice of a violation, then the jurisdiction is responsible to issue penalties. So 150 days between the notice of violation and the penalty phase, and that allows the jurisdiction to use other methods to achieve compliance prior to being required to issue penalties. Therefore, only the most recalcitrant violators will need to be fined. But the regulations allow for generators to be out of compliance for a total of 210 days before before penalties are issued. And I would just say that also that the regulations set a minimum penalty amount of at least $50 for the first offense within 1 year, and can go up to $500 a day for multiple offenses occurring within 1 year. So an early, robust education program with minimum will minimize the amount of future enforcement action needed.
Could any productions or facilities be exempt?
Yeah, so we kind of already touched bases about that, working with your jurisdiction to explore issued waivers, including physical space constraints and de minimis waivers. But that said, there are certain jurisdictions and census tracts within jurisdictions that have been issued an exemption or a waiver from CalRecycle, waiving them of the requirements for organic waste collection, and including but not limited to rural exemptions. That's like and low population waivers and high elevation waivers, where they have like bears and issues like that. So it seems possible where productions that, that there may be productions in one of those jurisdictions or one of those census tracts, and where collection service is not required or available. But again, we would just encourage you talk to your local jurisdiction recycling coordinator to find out your production or facility is waived and does not have to adhere to that organic waste.
And where can productions and facilities go to get more information?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to share a link for CalRecycle's main page, as well as we have like a database of local contacts where you can look up the city where you're going to be, and yeah, find the name of the person who you can contact.
Great, I think that would be really helpful. We have a little bit of time, so I wanted to open up to questions from the audience. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll do our best to pull them out for Jeff to answer. And it looks like we already have one question. How will SB 1383 apply to crews of less than 10 people?
It's a good question, and I understand where you're coming from. You would think, if it's small enough, maybe you can get out of the requirement, but it doesn't. Yeah, the number of people in a production doesn't matter. All generators of organic waste are subject to the law. Unless you have a waiver issued by the city that you're working in.
Great. Waiting for questions to come in.
Okay. I'll try to get together the links to the website.
Oh, that'd be great. Any other questions? Don't be shy. We have our expert here. One more that came in. Could the location in where they are filming impact because they will have to comply at that location?
Yeah, let me read that question. Could the location...
Let me see, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, because they will have locations that comply. Maybe they could elaborate. Could the location in where they are filming impact because they will have locations that comply? Yeah, I think that kind of falls under like a potentially waived jurisdiction. Like the state has a number of jurisdictions where or census tracts within jurisdictions that we have provided an exemption or a waiver. And so I guess if you were filming in one of those jurisdictions, then you wouldn't have to comply because it's not available there.
Someone asked if the PowerPoint will be shared with us after the session. Yes, we after the session's over, I believe in the coming days, you'll get an email with the link to the PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, should I throw the last slide out there?
There's one more question about recoverable food waste. What is recoverable food waste? And is this basically leftover food from catering?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes. If a caterer is dropping off food, and it would not be subject to the edible food recovery requirement, but it would still be encouraged if that's a possibility. But regardless of that, it would be subject to organic waste collection. Yes.
Great. I think we're just waiting for additional questions.
Certainly.
And thank you for bringing that information up. I'm sure it'll be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. I don't have the links look up local contacts readily available to throw into the chat, but I wonder if maybe Claudia or someone else does. That would be really cool.
We can also make sure that that's included when they send around a recap of email with the PowerPoint presentation.
Awesome. Thank you.
It looks like there is a question about what level of generator is subject to audits.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the jurisdiction can conduct an inspection, and they are basically each kind of developing how they're going to do that. I mean, there's some criteria to that. So I don't have, I guess we can explore more specifically what kind of scenario you're looking at, maybe offline, and try to hash out some of those details on how you might be inspected. But it's a little hard to explain like how the jurisdiction is going to go about those inspections during this. But feel free to reach out to me and I'd be happy to talk about that.
Thanks for making yourself available. I'm looking at the chat. Looking to see if there's any additional questions. Well, I don't see any additional questions. So I will go ahead and wrap unless there's one more. Will jurisdictions provide data or report to productions of the organic waste diverted from landfills?
That's a really good question. It's possible. I would think that if that was something you were interested in working with your jurisdiction on keeping track of, it's not, to my knowledge, a requirement that they break out each studio, each generator. They do keep track of all generators in their jurisdiction, and they keep track of the ones that are not in compliance. But yeah, if you're looking for something that you can kind of point to and say, this is what we did, I would talk to them about that. That's a really good idea.
Yeah, I assume if they're keeping track by generator, then each studio would probably be its own separate generator, but it'd be a way, it's a way to get some information from them.
Yeah, it also might be something that the haulers that you work with keep track of, specific businesses.
Because the only requirement for you to keep track is if you're doing your own self-hauling, correct?
For the organic waste collection, if you're self-hauling, yes, that's it. Edible food recovery, if you're subject to that, there's a record keeping requirement, whether you're self-hauling or if you're having services picked up.
Understood. Taking a scan here at the chat, see if there's any additional questions. I don't see any additional questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. Once again, thank you to Jeff for being our expert this afternoon, and many thanks to the Producers Guild and the Sustainable Production Alliance for putting this panel together. And thank you all for joining us. This presentation has been recorded, and a link to this recording will be sent out in the coming days. And Jeff has been kind enough to put his contact information up on the screen. So I hope you guys have a good evening, and we're happy to give you guys a little bit of your time back. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a pleasure.